Hey guys, this is me Ashik. So welcome to this Flask crash course. In this crash course, we will be seeing right from the basics to some of the advanced topics. We will start with creating a basic hello world app, and then we'll go into some of the advanced concepts like template inheritance and session management as well. So there are some prerequisites for this course. I assume that you have a basic knowledge of how the Python works and the basic syntax of Python. I also assume that you know a little bit of HTML and CSS. A little bit is fine. You don't need to be an expert to for this course. So first things first. So let me just install Flask to work on with it. I'm going to use pip-n. So let me just install pip-n install Flask. So that get installed, let us just create the app structure for our app. So it will be in need of an app.py file. That's the default configuration of the application file in Flask. If you want, you can use in any other file, and you have to set the environment variable before running the file. That's it. So and then we will also need a templates directory. So we'll be rendering templates. So for that we need a templates directory as well. And we also need a static directory. We are not going to be using that in this tutorial, but if you want to store all of your CSS and your JavaScript and your images file, all those should be inside the statics folder. So I hope that Flask it's still installing. So let's just wait for a moment that get installed. So we are going to really cover a lot of topics, guys. We'll start with a basic hello world app, and we'll see about how we can render templates to the browser, and we'll also see how we can pass variables to our HTML file. We'll also look at some of the advanced concepts like template inheritance and how we can get the response, how we can get the data from a form. We'll see all those steps. So let's get installed. So it's just locking the files. So I hope that it's so it'll get installed. We'll start with the crash course. So first we need to create our application. So for that we will use the from Flask we will import Flask as well. So the next thing what we should do is that we need to create an instance of our application. We'll say app equals Flask. We need to pass in a parameter. We'll pass underscore underscore name underscore underscore. So now we need to, in order to write a web application, we need URLs. So it's really easy to create a route in Flask. We just have to use the decorator, and we just have to say at app.route, and simple forward slash says nothing. It's actually the index route of our web page. When someone goes into a domain, so let's assume that our domain is at example.com. When someone goes into the example.com, this is the route that will get called up. So instead of this route, we need to create a function which runs whenever the user goes into this route. So we'll create a function named index. So just a second, index, and we'll just start up with the hello world example. We'll return a hello world. So that's it, guys. It's pretty easy to write a Flask application. So there was some sort of an error here. So I think why was there an error? I think I misspelled the package name. Install Flask. So let's just wait until it's getting installed. I don't know why is there a problem in installing Flask. Just a second, guys. Installing Flask. Just a second. I think I'm making a typing mistake here. Yeah, everything is fine here. So yeah, it's been installed now. So we just close this. So since we are running it locally, we need to set the environment as development so that we can use the debugger provided by Flask to debug. Flask can be equals development Flask run. So it will run. So we see that our app is running in this port. Let me just click this, and here we are. So our hello world example is working fine. So it's time to move forward. So now, right now, if we see our application, it's kind of really empty. So what we would like is that instead of just returning text, we can also return HTML tags as well. We'll see how to do that. Instead of just saying hello world, what you need to do is that we just have to return an HTML tag. We'll say h1 hello world. Yeah. So so if you run it with development environment, you don't need to reload the Flask app again and again. So it will reload automatically whenever there is a change in your Flask app. Let me just refresh the browser. Just a second, guys. So I think it's not detecting any change once again. So I have to do this, I guess. If underscore name underscore equals underscore main underscore we say dot run. So I did not start the debugger, so that's why debug equals true. So now I will just start again. Last run. Um, 1 second, guys. I think I did not set the environment properly. Last n equals development. So here, last run. Yeah, now it's starting with the debugger. So let me just reload this. Yeah, so if you notice that, we can see it as a h1 tag. So that's it, guys. Rendering a h1 tag is pretty simple, but it's still kind of empty. So what we would do is that we would like to move on with our examples. So I'm not going to remove this code. I'll keep this, so you can use it as a reference if you want. I'll upload this in my GitHub as well. So now, if you see, our application only returns a hello world example. So we want to make our application a bit more interactive. So what we will do is that we'll create another route slash, and we are going to use something called as a URL converter. So that's what Flask calls it. The URL converter is nothing but simply whenever a user comes into this default URL, and after this whatever the user types in, the Flask is going to get this and it's going to pass into the function that's coming after it. So we will just write a function named say hello. So it's going to take this user as a parameter. So instead of just returning hello world, so we could return an f string which returns a HTML tag which says hello from the user. This is how formatting works in Python. So we just have to close it. So if you see, we'll go into the default URL. The app is running. So when you go into this default route, you get this hello world. So when you go into slash Ashik, you get this hello Ashik. So if you go into slash Python, you get hello Python. So basically what we did was that we just took whatever the user typed in after the slash and we just passed it into our function. So by that way it's a little more interactive. Our web application can now say hello to anyone. If we just type in Miran, it can say hello to Miran. So that's it. So that's it. So the next thing is that when you work on real world projects, it's not going to be just returning hello world. So real world projects will have more than millions of lines of code with various templates as well. So what we need to do is that than returning a text file, we want to return a HTML template. So that's all about it. So how we would do that? So we are going to use this function called render template, which Flask provides for us. So we'll use this. So in this default route, we will say then returning a text, we will return a template, render template, and we have to pass in the name of the HTML file which we want to render it. So we'll just say index.html, index.html. So we have not created this file, we are going to create it now. So all of the templates file should be inside this templates directory. So that's the purpose of creating this directory. So we are creating an index.html file. So again, I am using VS Code. VS Code has Emmet built in. If you are not using Emmet, Emmet is a great tool. It minimizes your typing as well. So I can just type an exclamation and press an enter. It will give me an HTML, how to say, a boilerplate. So we just have to come up and just change this to Flask crash course. This is going to be the title of our HTML page. So and then we are going to do the same thing. We are going to return an h1 tag which says hello world. So that's it. Now we have our application file which returns a index.html file. So and in the index.html we have a simple h1 tag which just says hello world. Now let's try and run this app. So it has reloaded automatically. So if I refresh the browser again, so I'm just going to the default route. So enter. So it returns the hello world. So it was the same. We earlier did this. We returned a string. Now we are using an HTML template, and we are entering it to the browser. So now, so how we would? So since we have learned on how to return an HTML template, in most of the scenarios we would also need to pass in the variable to the HTML file. So if you assume, if you see in case of this route which we have down here, what we are doing is that we are getting the user and we are passing it to our function and then we are returning a formatted string. So then doing that, what we could do is that we are just going to grab the whatever the user types in, we are going to say a render template, and we are again going to render the same template index. So we'll just better do let's just name it as another file. We will say variables.html. So by this way you can have all of the files as a reference. So and then what we are going to do is that, so to pass in this user to our HTML file, we simply just have to type in a comma and then say user equals user. So this user is this variable is our local variable which is inside our app.py, and this is going to be the variable which we will be using in our HTML file. So let's create another file called variables.html. Inside the templates directory, variables.html. So it's going to be the same thing. Just going to press in, say the title will have it as passing variables. So we have passed the variable to our HTML file. So in order to add it to our HTML file, we just have to use this syntax. So we're just going to have an h1. So Flask uses something called a Jinja 2, which is a templating language, and it was created by the Flask creator itself. So Jinja 2 can be used to write templates. So the variable which we passed into our HTML file, we just have to simply open two curly braces and then close in, and inside of it whatever you write, Jinja 2 is going to plug in the value there. So if you see, we pass the variable user, we don't know the value yet. Once the user types in, we'll send it to our HTML file, and inside the HTML file we are just going to plug in the value. So by this way we can generate our HTML pages dynamically. So let's just run this again. If I go into the index route, it's still the same. If I go into slash and type Flask, it's returning Flask now. So that's how passing variables to Flask works. Sorry, passing variables to our HTML file. So we have only passed a single variable. In case if you want to pass multiple variables, we can just say something. You can just put a comma and then pass in our other variables. So we'll also pass in the length of the users, length of the whatever the user typed in. So we'll say count equals length of user, and we will modify our HTML file. We'll say user, and we'll have an h2 tag. It says your name is count. We are again using the Ginger syntax. Count characters long. So we are passing two variables and we are using both the variables in our HTML file. So now if I go back to the browser and type in ashik dash miran, I will see that hi, it says hi to me, Ashik Miran, and it also says me that your name is 12 characters long. So that's how it works. So now we have seen all of the basic things to get started in Flask. We have seen how to create routes, and we have seen how to pass variables to our HTML. So just a quick note is that this sort of syntax, we are using it, right? We are using a URL converter. So most people call it as creating dynamic URLs. So if you see, we did not create a specific URL for Ashik and then for Flask. This URL is generated dynamically. So if you use a lot of apps, something like GitHub or something, so you will have something like an URL endpoint like you will have URL endpoint like slash user slash ID slash your ID name. So this is how they are able to do all these things. We are creating a dynamic URL for all the users. So that's all about passing variables to HTML. So now we are going to look a little bit more in depth about Jinja 2. So how we can create some powerful templates, we'll see about that. So for that we need to create a route. We'll create a route named slash for underscore loops. We will see how we can write in loops in Jinja 2. We'll create a function named for underscore loops. So we are going to return a template for underscore loops dot html. So to demonstrate how the for loop works, we'll create a variable called languages, and we'll set it. It's going to be a list. We'll set it to Python and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So we are going to pass in this variable into our HTML file. So we'll say languages equals languages. So we are going to create a, let me just close this, sort of an error. We are going to create a HTML file for underscore loops dot HTML. So the basic app will say for loops in Jinja 2. That's going to be our title. And for the for loop, the syntax is as follows. So we need to say for, and we need to write a statement, and then we have to close this for. We say n for. So, and the statement which you are going to write is that we have passed a variable named languages. So it's pretty much like Python. If you are familiar with Python, we can do something like for language in languages. Sorry, languages. We can just sort of an error. Say an h1, and you can say hello from language. So what we are doing is that we have a variable called languages, and we have four items. We have four elements in it: Python, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what this is going to do is that this language variable, it's going to iterate through all the elements, and we are going to print the language what it is. So let me just open the terminal. So I think the URL was for loops. Let me just refresh this. And if I go into for underscore loops, sort of an error. So this is what I get. See, I get hello from Python, hello from HTML, hello from CSS, and hello from JS. So this is possible only because of the Ginger 2 loop which we have written here. We have written for language in languages, and we are saying a hello from each of this language. So another thing to note is that if you view the page source of this file, we will not even see the Ginger 2 syntax. So this is possible only because of Ginger 2 figures out uh, all of the conditions, and then only returns it to the HTML file. So this is how it's possible. I hope that the for loop was clear. Then we can move into, we'll see how we can have conditional statements in, how we can impose conditions in HTML file. So we'll create another route called app.route, and we'll call it as slash if else, and we'll create a function named if else, and we are again going to render a template. If else, all these names are not mandatory, you can name it however you want. I'm just going to render this if else, and we will again pass in this language variable. So we are going to use it. We will pass in languages equals languages. Well, I'll close this big file and sort of an error. So I'll create another file here called if else.html. So we'll create the boilerplate. We will say if else in Ginger 2. So and then it's going to be same. So we'll just copy this. We are just going to do the same thing, but we are going to impose some constraints in it. So it's again going to loop through the languages list, and instead of just printing hello message, we are also going to do something more interesting here. So we are going to create an if statement here, and we need to write in a statement, and then we have to close this if statement. We say end if. So the statement which you are going to write is that, so if you see we received hello message from these four languages. So we will, if the language is equal to Python, you can use the Python syntax here, like you'll use the or variable to write an or condition in Python. You can follow the same rule here. If the language is Python, or if the language is equal to JS, we are going to return H. We're going to print a H2 which says uh, language is popular. Yeah, that's it. So what we are doing is that we are looping through the list, and if the language is Python or JavaScript, we are just going to say that they are popular. So sort of an error. Let's just run this. So if I again, so I need to go into a different route. If else, so let me press enter, and we get, here we see hello from Python, and we say that Python is popular, and the HTML and CSS are, they are not they have failed the if condition, and then the JavaScript has passed the if condition, and we again see that JavaScript is popular. So that's how you can add in ifs and else conditions into our HTML file. So now we are going to see a pretty important concept which is called as template inheritance. So some people also call it as pagination in Flask. So you can assume, you can think template inheritance of something like having a basic layout and then inheriting from the basic layout. So if I want to give you guys an example, if you have ever shopped in Amazon or Flipkart or some e-commerce websites like that, if you see their main template always remains the same, their navigation bar or their sidebar, it always remains the same. The only thing that differs is the content of each of the products. So this is a great scenario to use a template file. So what we can do is that we can have the navigation bar and all those things in a basic template file, and we can just inherit from the template file, and we can extend it, and we can add in few more HTML content to it. So we'll see how we can do that. So now if you have seen this file for loops.html and if else.html, so it's okay with for loop that there's nothing repetitive in for loop. But if you see if else.html, we are again, once again let me just bring this here, sort of an error. So if you see the if else.html, we are actually reproducing this statement again. We are writing this for loop again. So one good solution would be that we could have this for loop inside a template, and then we can inherit from this template. So we're going to create a template. We'll first create it and then we'll see. So a template is just like an HTML file. You just have to write an HTML file. We'll name it as layout.html, and then you have to write this, and then, so there are some important things to note down here. Since we are going to be using this as a template, each HTML file will have its own title, so you cannot fix the title in the layout file. So what we need to do is that we need to create blocks, and the inheriting files will replace the block with the content which has to be replaced. So we'll create a block. We can call this block any name, but I prefer to call it title, so it's pretty meaningful to call it as title. And then we'll do end block, sort of an error. And then we'll also create a block body, sort of an error, so that others can use this block to write their body content. We will say end block. So now at first we are just going to do this for loops and if else once again using a template. So we are going to create another route. Let me close this. Let me have this for reference. We are going to create another route called, once again, sort of an error, tab.route. We are going to call it for underscore loops underscore inherited. So this is just to differentiate inherited. We're going to create a function for loops inherited. So it's not mandatory that this URL and this function name should be same, but it's, most people have it to be same, and I also prefer it to be same. You can have it whatever you want, but it's quite good to give a meaningful name for this. So because in our HTML file we will be using this function name in order to redirect a user to a specific route, so it's better to use a meaningful name. So what we say is that we just return another template and we call it for loops underscore inherited dot html. So now we'll create a file which is going to inherit from the template. So for loops underscore inherited dot html. So here we need not write the whole HTML with the header tag and the metadata and all these tags. We can just replace these blocks in our inheriting file. So for that, first we need to tell Flask that we are going to inherit a template. So the syntax for that is we need to say extends and the file name which are going to extend. In our case, it's going to be layout.html. So once you have written the statement, Jinja 2 will recognize that you are inheriting from a template. So and then we have to just fill in these blocks. Will we'll keep the blog title as for loops in Jinja using templates. That's going to be, and then you should also, it's not mandatory that you have to actually fill in all of the blocks you create. If you don't create a block in the inheriting file, Jinja 2 will ignore it. It's not going to throw you some error. So let me just fill in the block, and for the block body we are just going to copy and paste this for loop. Control C and paste this, control this, indent this. So if you see in our for loops inherited.html, we have extended the layout.html, and inside this block title we have given a title for our this inheriting file, and inside the block body we have a for loop, just as the for loop here with all of this HTML content. So now if we run our Flask app, let me just go into for loops underscore inherited. So just for this demonstration purposes, I'm manually going to the search box and typing the URL, but in real life applications you will be having some sort of like a button or something which redirects the user to the specific route. So we'll also see if we have some time. So let me just go in here. Oh, one second, I have misspelled something. For loops underscore inherited, for loops underscore inherited. It's going to be for loops inherited.html. So everything is same here. I don't know why it's not showing up. For loops underscore inherited.html. We are extending from layout.html. So everything is fine. We just name this pretty simple, for underscore inherited, everything is same, for loops underscore inherited.html. Html, it's also inside this templates directory. Why isn't it showing up? Just once again. Oh yeah, guys, I found out the mistake. It's because that, so here we are using the languages variable, which is a list, but we are not passing it into the URL. So that's the reason we are not displaying anything. So if you see, Jinja 2 did not throw any error, so it just kept it as such. So we just have to pass in the variable languages equals languages. Yeah. So and again, if we refresh, it should work. Yeah. Oh, once again, I underscore isn't it? Oh, so the route name is I have changed it, right? I have changed it to for underscore inherited. So I have to change it here. For underscore inherited. Yeah. So now if you see, we are able to see the same output which we got earlier. But if you notice, the code size has reduced dramatically. So if you see both of this template, so since this is a small example, it might look same to you. Both of the files have 13 lines. But assume that you are going to create some application like Amazon or Flipkart, which requires millions of lines of code and it has millions of products. So this will literally make a dramatic difference. So now if you see, we are again going to redo this if condition, but what we are going to do is that since our for loops is inheriting from the layout file, we are going to inherit the for loops HTML, which in turn inherits the layout.html. So if it seems a bit confusing, so it will get cleared in a minute. Once again. So what we need to do is that inside of our for loops inheriting file, we need to create a block. We need to say block if else, and we'll close this block in the block. So and what we are going to do is that we are going to create another route. It says a tab dot route slash if else underscore inherited. We are going to create a function if else underscore inherited. We are going to return a template. It's going to be if else underscore inherited. One second, this. Yeah, inherited dot html. And even here we need to pass in the variable languages equals languages. So we'll create the HTML file if else underscore inherited dot html. So here instead of extending the layout file, we are going to extend the uh, for loops underscore inherited file. Extends for loops inherited dot html. So we just have to now write the this if else block alone. We'll just copy and paste this. We'll just say if the language is equal to Python, or the language if it is equal to JS, we are going to just repeat the same. And if we are just going to say, we are just going to print the variable language. We will say language is awesome. So we are extending the for loops inherited.html, and inside of the for loops inherited.html, it's in turn inheriting from the layout.html. So if we now run this, we'll see whether it's working or not. The route name was if else inherited. Just press enter. Once again, underscore inherited. If else underscore inherited, I think we are doing it right, but there is something we are missing out. Here extends the for loop underscore inherited.html. So I think we'll just create a div and we'll place it inside that. We'll just create a div. I think this should work. I think that Flask is ignoring this and it's thinking that there is no block inside this and I think it's ignoring it. We just rerun it again. If else inherited. Yeah, I think guys that's it's since it's inside this block, I think it's ignoring this. But we'll check whether it's working or not. We'll just try another example. We say that block if else. Once again, we'll just end this block here. End the block. Instead of just doing all this, we'll just say instead of just block if else, we'll just return say if else is working. Let's try and rerun this. I think it's layout.html block if else. Let's see whether it's ignoring it or running it. Sort of an error. Let me just refresh it. If else inherited, it should work. Yeah, so yeah guys, that's working, but one thing to note is that since we had this block inside the other block, so what Flask thought was that this block is a block which is defined in layout file, and the user has not defined it explicitly, so that's why it was ignoring it. So when we defined it outside of this, I think it should work. Let's just try once more. uh, Let me just try it again. Block if else. I think it's because the language variable which you are referencing, it's restricted to this for loops file, but we are using another, but we are trying to access it from the another file. So I think it's because of the scope that it's not working. So if I just then imposing an if condition, if I just say in if dash else, I think that it should get rendered up 4 times because we are inside the loop. It will get rendered 4 times. So we'll see. So if I refresh it, yeah. So if you see, it's actually not ignoring. The problem was that we used the variable which we are using was language, and it's the scope of this variable is only limited into this file. Since we are trying to use the same variable here, so that's why we are getting an error, but now it's working. We get the if else 4 times. So I think that's it about inheriting templates. So we'll go into some advanced topics. We'll try to learn how we can get the data from the users. So we are going to create a route. We will create a form and then we will try to get the data. Form which is define class called form. We are going to return render template form.html. So we need to create that file. We'll create form.html. So guys, if you notice, we already had a layout file, so I'm going to use it. I'm not going to create a full HTML file. So this is the power of using templates. So extends layout.html. I say block body in block. I'm just going to copy this. Sorry, it has to be block title. Title. The title is going to be using, sorry for that, forms in Flask. So we are going to create a form. Just going to type in form. So let's just ignore this action for now, and we are going to send this form through post method. So there are various HTTP methods available: get, post, update, and delete. So the reason for sending it through post method is that if you send the data through get method, it will appear in the search box. So if you are getting the some sensitive informations like password, we don't want it to be visible to others. And the other reason is that get method has some size restrictions, whereas you can post method does not. You can send almost a big file. So that's the difference between get and post. So now we'll create our form. Just say input type equals text, and we'll give it a name called uh, name. So we will use this whatever the value which you have given here, we will use this in our app.py file to get the value which the user uh, inputs in. We need to create a placeholder and say enter your name. Input, it's going to be a number. We will input their age. Name equals age, placeholder. uh, I think there is some error. That's nothing here. Placeholder equals enter your age. Will create a submit button. Input colon submit, and the value is going to be submit. So if we just now see this, if we try to see this form in our file, say form, so this is how it's going to be. So it's pretty ugly now. So what you could do is that we can create another block inside this header tag. We'll call it as, just copy this. I can say this block as block style sheet. So since we have this block called style sheet, we can use this in our inheriting file to define some to create some specific tiles just for the current file, and we can have a general file in our layout file, and then inside our specific file we can create our styles and then we can modify it. So inside this block, since it's inside the header tag, I need to create a style tag. So it's pretty ugly now. Let me just style this input. We will display this as a block. It's just going to display this as a block, and we'll give it some padding, 1 rem. So if you wonder what rem is, rem stands for relative m units. I think 1 rem is equal to 16 pixels. It's better to use rem since they are responsive. We'll also input. So let me just see how this looks. So we will create a container so that we can center everything. We just wrap this inside a container. Container. So we'll say dot container width 80%, margin auto, just to center things. And we'll also give some width to the input field so that it's a bit wider. Give it as 2 rem. I think that's pretty much enough for the styling. Sort of an error if I refresh it. So I should give some 100 pixels. It's still just give 10 rem. Yeah, I'll also give a margin bottom so that, so sorry for that. CTOM bottom, give 1 rem. So yeah, now it's quite fine. I wouldn't say that it's a great UI, but that's fine for now. So we have created our HTML file. So the action attribute is nothing but the URL to which this form data should get posted to. So by default it will go to the same URL, but if you want to send this data to another URL, you can pretty much do it. I'm going to send this to the same URL. So for that you need to use the same Jinja syntax which you used it to plug in a variable, and you just have to say URL for and then the function name. So that's why I said you to give some meaningful name so that you can later refer this URL for form. So now our job is to collect this data in the backend. Sort of an error. So by default, any Flask route which you create will accept a GET request. You need not create a GET request method explicitly. So since we are submitting to this route using post, we need to allow say Flask that this route should accept a post request, post method. So we can say that by creating methods equals, it has to be a list of methods that this route can get and post. So this route is going to get in the post request as well. So we say, so in order to get the form, we are going to use a function called request from Flask. Sort of an error. So what we say, if the request dot method, if it is equal to post, and what we are going to do is that we are going to get the data which the user inputted. So if you see, this name field has a value called name. Let me just copy this, and I have to say name equals request dot form. There are actually two ways of getting a data, so we will see both the two ways. You can either say request dot form, and you can access this as a dictionary, and you can just pass in the name, or you can do something like age equals request dot form dot get, and then you can pass in the name variable. Sort of an error which you gave here. So if you ask me about the reason difference between both of these two, if you get the data through this method, and if the value key which you give, if it's not present, this is going to return an error. But if you are using the dot get method, if there is no key present, it will just return none. So we are getting both of this, and what we will do, we will return another template. It says render template. We will call it as response.html, and we will create it response.html. So here we will again extend the layout as well. So that's the reason for creating a layout. You no need to create the HTML again and again. Extends layout.html. So now to give it a block, we say block title, we close the block, we say end block. Sort of an error. Just give some title like response from you, and we need to create another block which says block body, end block. We are going to whatever the data that the user send, we are going to say it here. We'll use an h1 tag. We say your name is, and we have not passed this variable to our file. We will pass it. We'll say comma name equals name, comma age equals age, so that we can access it from our HTML file. And if the method is not post, we are just going to render the form.html. So if you are using the same route like this, it's actually a good way to do this. So say your name is, and we will say your age is age. Yeah. So just to recap what we have done, we have created a route called form, and if the method was a get method, we are entering the form template, and if it was a post method, we are getting both of the name and age from the user, and we are rendering a template called response.html, and inside the response.html we are just saying that your name is so and so and your age is so and so, and we have this form, we have response.html. So if we refresh it, oh, I think there was some error. I think if request dot method invalid syntax. Where is the syntax error? If request dot method is get, just try to do this again. Yeah, so I had this both. So if I type in my name, I say Ashik Miran, and if I type in my age as 18, and if I try to submit this, it's going to go into this route. We are going to get the infos and we are going to send a response. Let's see whether this works. We hope that this will start. Yeah. So we see that your name is Ashik Miran and your age is so and so. So if I do this again, my of an error. The name is Flask, and my I think Flask is 12 years old. And now submit. It says me that your name is Flask and your age is so and so. So this is how you would create a form and you will get the data from the backend. And so now we are going to see another concept called session. So there are basically two types of storages, almost three: session, local storage, and session storage. Sorry, cookie, session, and local storage. Local storage is where you store the data permanently. If you want the data to persist even when the user has left the browser, that's where you store the data. So if you want to store the data only when the user is logged into a particular session, that's when we will use the session storage. So to use session storage, we need to import it from Flask. We say import session. So in order to use session, so Flask encrypts your session. Whatever the data are present in your session, Flask uses a secret key to encrypt them. So that, but that's but the session can be decrypted as well. There are various articles on how to decrypt the session. So you did not save any sensitive informations like password in the session. So it can be easily decrypted. So we say app.config. So this is how you explicitly set a configuration value. There are various best practices on how to do this. The best way I suggest is that you create a separate file named configuration.py, and based upon the environment you load the configuration. I think if you have some time we can see that as well. So let me just complete this. Secret key of an error, and it has to be a really secret. There is a Python library called secrets. You have to generate secrets using some libraries. So it will be, so because it will be some hard to decrypt it. So we'll say this should be really secret. So the best way I can demonstrate you about this session is that by creating a login system. We'll create a simple login system at app.route. That's how I can say if the user is logged in, we will add his username to the session at app.route slash login. Of an error, we're going to return define a function login. Just going to say return render template login.html. So let me close this. So I would require these names. So I'll copy this. Again, I'm going to use templates. Of an error. Let me just create a new file called login.html, and we are going to say the title as login. And I think I can use the same form.html here. We'll just rename. I'll just rename this as. We'll again send the data back to the login route as well. So it has to be a name, and we say enter your username. We say instead of age, you will have input type as password. So when you have set your input type to password, the uh, text which user inputs will be actually seen to the will be actually seen as an asterisk. So you cannot see it. So you have to name as password. We will say enter your password. and also copy the styles from form.html. Of an error, I'm copying the styles. So I guess the login is pretty much done. Let's just check whether this works or not. Let me just no, cancel. Let me just go into slash login. So here we see our username and our password, so it's working. So now in the backend we are going to get the credentials. So since we are not seen how we can connect with the database and stuff like that, we are going to create our dummy database. We will create a dictionary which says something like user1 as a password of pass1. We are just doing it for this purpose. I'm also planning to do a video on how to connect to a database and how to, we'll be using a package called SQL Alchemy, and we'll also see how we can query the database using ORMs. I'm also planning to do that. Hopefully we'll also see that. User2 as a password of pass2, and we'll create three users. Users3 as a, sorry, user3 as a password of pass3. That's it, we have created a dummy database. So since this route is accepting a post method, we have to say method equals get comma post. Of an error. So once again, if the request dot method was post, then we are going to get the username and password. Username equals request dot form of username. I'm just going to use this syntax, and password equals request dot form of password. That's what the name we have given in our HTML file. And in order to validate whether he is a registered user or not, since we have a dummy database, what we could do is that we can do something like if username, if it is not in. So if you are familiar with Flask, in order to get the keys of a dictionary, we can say db.keys, which will give us the keys, which are user1, user2, and user3. If the username is not in it, which means that yes, this user has no account, we will just return h1, which says, we'll also style it. Style equals color colon red. Sorry, we have to use single quotes since we are already using it. Color colon red. Of an error. And we say you have no account. We will close this h1. So if the user does not have an account, he will get an error message. But what if the user has an account? We have to validate whether the password is right or not. So which means if we are in this position, which means that the user has an account, we can check whether the password is correct or not by if db of username, which will give us the password of the user. If it is not equal to the password which the user inputted, so we again just return an error message. We say your password was incorrect. Your password was incorrect. So if the user has an account, and if this condition fails, which means that the user has inputted the right password, we say session is just like a dictionary, we can simply add it. Session of user equals username. So just to demonstrate the session variable we have, this will be globally available to all of our HTML files. So just to demonstrate that, we can say return under template login underscore response dot html, and we are not going to pass in this session variable. Let's see what happens. We are going to create another file. We say login underscore response dot html, and we are again of an error. Let me just copy this up and I'll paste it. I'm just going to remove all of these forms. Let me remove this style sheet block. I don't need a style sheet. Let me block as dashboard. So we assume that we have created an app and this is going to be a dashboard. And here we say an h1 which says you are logged in as. We're going to use ginger to syntax. We're going to print session of user. So if you remember, we did not pass this variable to our HTML file, but we are still accessing it from our HTML file. Let's see what's happening. So I think all of our conditions are okay. You just see the login.html. I think everything is fine. URL for login. So let's try this. Of an error. Let me just refresh it. So if you remember, this was our data. So if we had three users, user 1, user 2 and user 3. If I tried to log in as user 7, 8, and you let me give a password as something. And if I try to submit it, let's see what happens. Of an error. Oh, the browser sent a key error. Request.form of username. Login. Oh, sorry, I have not changed this as a username. So if you see, since I am getting the data as a request, I'm not using the dot get method. Flask has shown me an error. If I would have used the dot get method, it would have not shown me an error. Let me just change this to as username. So that was the error. Let me just refresh it again. We'll submit the form. Not understand username. User name. That's what I had it in my login.html. Username. Enter your username. Am I using the right template? So we have our login.html. Yeah, it's the right template. So let me just use the dot get method and see what's happening. I think it worked earlier, but why isn't it working now? I think it's because of this. Just go back and refresh it. Oh, I think it was. Let me use the dot get method then. Of an error. Dot get username password. I think it should work now. Username equals request.form dot get username. We have our form here. Action is the same URL and the method is post. Input type equals text. This should work now. We just go back. Of an error. Of an error. Refresh it. Let's do user 10 password. Yeah. So I think there was some error accessing it through form. So if you see, the value which I gave was user 10, and the user 10 is not registered in our database. So we say that you have no account. So if we say something like user 1, and if I misspell the password, let's see what's happening. Let me just give a long password. Of an error. Name error. Password is not defined. Oh, there was a typo here. Sorry for that. It's WORD. How do I am missing it? Password. So just submit the form again. So it says me that your password is incorrect. So now let's try to give in the right credentials. What was the password? We just log in as user 2 and type in pass2. Let's hope that this works. So yeah, so it's because of Chrome. So now we see that you are logged in as a user. So if we open developer tools and if we go into application and let me just increase this. If you go into the storage, you will see a tab called session storage. And if you see, once again, yeah, we have a key value pair here. So this was the value with, this is the data which we have in our session. Since we use a secret key, this is encrypted, but this can be decrypted as well. So I suggest you guys not to use it. So I think that we have pretty much covered everything. So there is still one thing which I need to cover. So I said that right, we are manually going here and changing the URL. So let's just do something different. We have our index.html, right? We will open it. We say index.html. What we, instead of saying hello world, and we will also create an anchor tag. So we say that click here to login, and we say, and this is going to take the URL to which the user has to be sent. Oh, sorry for the typos. So we will send the user to the login function. I think it is somewhere down here. It's not here, it's here. Just copy this of an error and let me paste it here. So when the user clicks this button, he will be redirected to the login route. And since the clicking of a button is a GET request, we will return the login.html template. So now we will go into the default route, and here we have a h1 tag, and we have a link which says click here to login. When we click it, ah, why was that? Oh, sorry guys. You cannot just say login. You have to use the URL for, and then we have to say login. So let me refresh it. Of an error. When I click this, yeah, it's redirecting me to the login. So that's one thing. This is how you have various buttons. When you click on a button, you get redirected to various URLs. And there's also another one thing which I need to. We will have something. Even in from Flask, we can redirect users to another route. And just demonstrate that at app.route. We will call it as slash dashboard. We will define a function called dashboard, and what we are going to do is that if the user data and the password was correct, then just returning a template here, we will return the template here. And what we are going to do is that we are going to store this name in the session, and then we are going to redirect the user to this route. So to do that, we need the use of two functions: the import redirect and URL for from Flask. So what we say that if the user has logged in successfully, we say return from this function and redirect the user, which takes a URL for, and we pass in the function name dashboard. So now we are redirecting to the user, and in turn we are entering the template, response template. We'll see whether this works or not. Of an error, we just go to this index, just go to login. We will log in as user1. We will take the password as pass1. We just submit it. Yeah, we see we have been redirected to a URL called dashboard, and then we see that you are logged in because of this is what we have in our HTML file. So I think that's it, guys. We have pretty much covered a lot of things. If we have covered on how to render templates, creating routes, passing HTML variables. We have also seen how we can write in loops and conditions in our HTML file. We have also seen that how we can inherit from a file. We also saw how we can get the response from a form. We have seen all these things. So I'm going to upload this code into GitHub. So you can use this as a reference. Yes, I'm also planning to do another video. Hopefully we'll cover databases, connecting to a database using an ORM to query the database. So I think that's it, guys. It was a pretty long video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. So let me just conclude it here. Thank you guys for watching this video. Thank you. Stay tuned for the next video.